So back in the first semester of my 8th grade year, I was forced to take the most pointless class in middle school history. It was called leadership, and while the title might make it sound semi-useful for life, it was the most useless class that the education system has ever forced me to take. And on top of that, this class was an absolute nightmare for my social anxiety. So first of all, leadership was basically a rebranded speech class, so we had to make like 6 or 7 speeches. And in addition to that, the school just threw a bunch of random tasks that they didn't know what else to do with. It was basically like an office assistant class. One of the noble tasks assigned to the leadership class was this happy feel-good mail campaign called Choose Kind Mail, which basically consisted of people writing nice notes to their friends that would be delivered to the recipient's 8th period class by the leadership students. So on the first day of deliveries, I was given one bag with one note in it that I was supposed to deliver to Mr. Robbins. Now, Mr. Robbins was by far the most intimidating teacher in the entire school. He was this big guy covered in tattoos who had the shortest temper ever and would notoriously yell at his class for really small things. And on top of that, I was the tiniest 8th grader imaginable, so I was pretty stressed out about delivering this note. So I, kind of trudged towards Mr. Robbins' door with my bag that had one note in it, and I looked in through the window to see that Mr. Robbins was in the middle of a lecture to a class of about 30 people. So after seeing that, what little courage I had in me was just gone. And the next 5 minutes were spent pacing in front of the door thinking of any way possible out of this situation. But finding no escape, I finally mustered the courage to open the door and walk into the class with my note. So as soon as I walked into the class, Mr. Robbins stopped talking and looked at me, which caused the entire class to also look at me, and I was kind of frozen for a few seconds. So, awkwardly standing there in front of this giant class of people that I didn't know, I was just like, Mr. Robbins, I have this, it's a delivery. And he pretty much just responded like, oh, okay. And he took the bag and put it on the table at the front of the classroom, and I got the heck out of that classroom as fast as I could. So after I got out of that classroom, I was pretty proud of myself. I'd done something that I did not think I was capable of doing. So I casually strolled back to the leadership classroom, and I saw everyone organizing bags at the front of the room. And I was kind of confused, so I went up to the teacher and asked what the bags were for. And she said, oh, they're just organizing the empty bags in alphabetical order for next time, so just put your empty bag with the others and they'll organize it. So I kind of stood there for a few seconds just processing what was going on, because nobody had told me that I wasn't supposed to leave the bag in the classroom. So I was just like, it's not a problem if I left the bag in there, is it? And she was just like, oh, you left the bag? Oh, that's okay. Just go back over there and get it back. No big deal. Yep. No problem at all. I once again left the leadership room, went all the way back to Mr. Robbins' classroom, and looked through the window hoping that he might be done with his lecture this time. No such luck, he was still talking to this entire class of people. So I muster up the negative strength that is within me, and I open the doorknob and just walk in. I tried not to look at the class this time and just focus on Mr. Robbins, but looking at Mr. Robbins wasn't really any less intimidating than looking at the 30 students, so I kind of looked at all of them at once, and it was even more awkward. After having everyone's undivided attention for about 5 seconds and not saying anything because of the sheer terror of the whole situation, I managed to stammer to Mr. Robbins like, hey, I need the bag back. He looked at me like I was insane or something. He was just like, the bag? Just like, yeah, I just need the bag back. So he slowly walked over to the table, picked up the bag, and slowly gave it back to me. And as soon as I touched that bag, I got out of that classroom as fast as I could. So I was out of the classroom yet again. And at this point, I felt like a hero. I had just looked death in the eye and survived. So this time I was like more than triumphant. I walked back to that classroom like, yes, I am now a legend among introverts. I swung open the door to that leadership classroom and laid down my prize in the pile with the others. But right before I put the bag down, I noticed a flash of color at the bottom right corner, and I took a closer look. And that's when the world stopped. There's only a few moments in my life where I literally wish that I could just cease to exist. And this one's pretty high up on that list, because at that moment I realized that the note was still in the bag. An entire class of strangers had just watched me walk into that classroom, deliver a note, and then walk back in and ask for the same note back. And that's when everything started to click. That must have been why Mr. Robbins was so confused about giving me the bag back, because the note was still in it. He hadn't even touched it since putting it on the table the first time. So, yet again, I walked out of the leadership classroom and all the way back to Mr. Robbins' door. And of course, he was still in the middle of his lecture. Now, this time, I was determined to not mess this up. So, while outside the door, I removed the note from the bag and left the bag outside the door so there was no possible way that I could leave it in there again. So, the third time I walked into the classroom, nobody was pretending. I knew I was an idiot, and everybody in that classroom knew I was an idiot. So, I opened the door, holding this tiny note with the stupidest happy message saying like, "You're a cool person," or whatever. Walked up to Mr. Robbins, who was obviously kind of mad at me for interrupting his lecture 3 times in the span of 10 minutes. And I took a deep breath. "Mr. Robbins, I'm sorry, I didn't realize the note was still in the bag the last time I came in here. Please deliver it this time. Thank you, bye." And I got out of that classroom as fast as my shaky legs could carry me. Now, this time when I left the classroom, I knew the truth. I wasn't a hero. I had been given a very, very simple and easy task and had somehow managed to fail at it in the most embarrassing way possible. So I got back to the leadership classroom, sat back at my table, and just didn't talk to anyone for the rest of the day. And from that day forward, I refused to ever go alone to deliver a note to any of the other classes because I was not going to go through that again. After that day, I did whatever it took to get out of having to go by myself to deliver a note. However, this is not where the story ends. So naturally, because I just love telling stories, this became my favorite story to tell people. In fact, I began to realize that the events that had happened were so perfect that it almost seemed like I had made it up. It almost seemed like it was written for a film. So naturally, come junior year film class, where we were assigned to make our own 5-minute short film, I took my Mr. Robbins story from 8th grade and turned it into a script. No changes needed. So after about 2 weeks of desperately trying to cast everyone I needed for this film, I had my film class playing the leadership class, my dad playing Mr. Robbins, and 42 rowdy theater kids playing Mr. Robbins' class. And I remember that day very specifically. It was October 21st of 2016. And as I stood there having to direct all of these actors, I realized 3 important things. First of all, in the 3 years since the original traumatic experience in 8th grade, my social anxiety had not improved at all. Second of all, I realized that no amount of leadership class could actually prepare me to lead 42 theater kids into the limelight. And third of all, in creating this script based off of a traumatic experience, I had created an even more traumatic experience for myself. And even now, making this video talking about yet another traumatic experience from 4 years ago, I still remember October 21st, 2016 was one of the scariest days of my entire life. I have literally directed an entire short film since then, and I still haven't even come close to directing that many extras. The most extras I had to direct at once in the short film was like 12. And even now, as a 20-year-old man, I am still too stressed to rewatch that video that I made in high school because I remember the stress from it too vividly. But naturally, I talked about it on this channel, so the link to it will be in the description. I can't even tell you if it's good or bad. All I can say is I made it when I was 16. So if you want to, have fun watching it, and as always, follow your dreams.